What they had in Babylon was a Jewish community with lawyers and judges who judged according to Jewish law, and they governed themselves according to Jewish law. The term rabbi doesn't come into existence until later, and the term rabbi, at the time it comes into existence, simply means my teacher. That's what it means, my teacher or my master. But the rabbis of the period of the Talmud and down to the 19th century, or the 20th century, the rabbis are not what we consider clergymen. The rabbis were lawyers and judges. So it was a growth in the knowledge of the law which ultimately led to the building of a body of legal scholars who governed the Jewish community. And by the way, the Jewish government, self-government, was a government that was essentially a jurisprudence government, a judicial government. They governed themselves by virtue of the law as they interpreted it under given conditions and changing conditions. And what is interesting is to see how Jewish law incorporates elements of Babylonian law because they're living in Babylon. Jewish law in Jerusalem is different. That's why the two Talmuds that emerged, the Babylonian Talmud and the Palestinian Talmud, are different in many ways because they're different dealing with different geographical conditions. Now, the Jews then created a diaspora. How was the Jewish diaspora created? By voluntary movement. Why did the Jews create a diaspora? Because they were living in Babylon, and then they went to Persia because the royal palace, the imperial palace, was also in Persia. And by the way, the Persian emperors had three palaces. The summer palace was in the north, in a place called Hamadan, which is near Tehran. Why? Because there it is cool in the summer. You go to the mountains. The winter palace was in Shushan, which is down near the seashore, near the Persian Gulf. Why? Because it's warm in winter. Hey, a king has to live where it's comfortable. So you take your government with you. In the summer you go to Hamadan, in the winter you go to Shushan, and in the spring and the fall you stay in Babylon because that's the center of commerce and industry and the whole movement of business all over the world. So you have three capitals: Babylon in spring and fall, and Shushan in winter, and Hamadan in summer, and that's the way it goes. I mean, you know, today, of course, the president can just fly to Cape Cod or to, what is it, Harry Truman used to go to Key West, and Eisenhower used to go to Denver, Colorado. I mean, you go where it's easy for you to run the government. So if you don't have air conditioning, you go where it's cool. Now, the Persian emperors had three capitals, and the Jews went to these capitals because there were opportunities, and such opportunities that Jews became members of the imperial cabinet. The book of Nehemiah in the Bible was written by a member of the imperial cabinet, and he describes the problem. The emperor said, build Jerusalem, and the Jews went and they started to build Jerusalem and the temple, and they were having trouble, as we always do. And they were being helped by the Jews in Babylon, but they were still having trouble. So the emperor said, what's going on? Why isn't the progress going as we want it to? Nehemiah is a member of his cabinet. From the description, he might have been prime minister, but he was high up in the cabinet. So Nehemiah looks at the emperor and says, look, if you want me to, I'll go there. You know, I'll leave my position in the cabinet, and I'll go there with authority, and in 2 years I'll see if I can clean up the mess and get things going. So the emperor says, okay, go, and I'll make you governor of the provinces. And so Nehemiah went there for 2 years, but he stayed 14, because things don't go so quickly, you know. And there are problems, and there were other peoples living in the area who said, we don't want the Jews to build their temple. You know, we replaced them, now we don't want them to come back. We've heard that. So these were the things that were going on. But Jews moved because they had freedom of opportunity. Therefore, the diaspora of the Jewish nation was created by the Jews in an atmosphere of freedom of movement and of opportunity. So if you hear that it's possible to do business in China then you try to establish a caravan route. So you can buy silk in China and tea, whatever else you want, and bring it back to the West. And so Jews moved in all directions. The Megillah doesn't mention that they had a community there, but it does mention the communities in India. And I believe that the Jewish community in China was established later, but there was one, a Chinese Jewish community, which flourished until comparatively recent times. Yes?
Kaifeng was the capital, and there was a Jewish community in Kaifeng.
Kaifeng is of a later period, medieval period. I believe that the Kaifeng Jewish community was established in China probably during the Roman period, and when the Jews of Babylon and Iran started to establish a Trans-Asian route, and they came there, and they wanted to buy silk to sell in the West. And the Chinese said, well, you're foreigners, you can't live in the Forbidden City, but we'll give you another place to live. And so south of Beijing is Kaifeng, and that's where they established the Jewish community, and they flourished for centuries. And actually, the decline of the Jewish community of Kaifeng was caused by the Portuguese sailing around Africa, the whole thing. All right, but that has nothing to do with the Persian period. All we know is that in the course of centuries, Jewish communities were established all over Asia, and eventually we'll see in Europe as well. Now, let's skip to the later period and simply see how the Jewish communities of the West came into existence. And that happened as a result of the growth of the Roman Empire. The first Jewish community, substantial Jewish community in the West, was the Jewish community of the city of Alexandria, Egypt. Alexander the Great, in his sweep through the Near and Middle East, in a brief period of time, established control over Egypt, the entire Middle East, and went down into India. Then he turned around and came back and wanted to establish his world empire with the capital in Babylon, which was the natural place. But he established the city of Alexandria in Egypt. That is, he drew the plans, he told his architects, get to work, and they started to build the city. Alexandria in 328 BC, when he came there, was just a fishing village, nothing. 75 years later, it was the greatest Greek city in the world. It had just exploded and boomed. And when it is at this great period of 250 BC, 75 years after Alexander the Great, and it is a flourishing city, a very interesting phenomenon. It is a Greek city, and 1/3 of its population is Jewish. So you see, then again, you don't need a corroborating document. All you say is you look at these phenomena and try to explain the difference. Why is it that within 78 years or 75 years, it had grown to be such a great city and had such a large proportion of Jews among its population? And the answer can only be a simple logical explanation of the fact that since Alexandria became a great booming commercial center, it attracted population in large numbers. And if it was booming, and so was the capital of the Greek Empire in Asia, with its capital at Antioch on the northern Mediterranean shores in northern Syria, people moved into these cities because this was the economic boom town. These were the economic boom towns. There were several of them. Alexandria happened to be the big one. And Jews migrated, moved from Israel and probably from Babylonia as well. As the center of gravity of economy moved into the West, people followed. And so there was this Jewish population in all the Greek cities around the Eastern Mediterranean world, and they were a substantial portion of the population, 20, 25%, 30%, and so on. Yes?
How do you know that 1/3 of Alexandria?
Oh, because the ancient writers mention it. The ancient writers who lived there, they mentioned this in their histories.
Even back then,
Oh, of course they sent a census of population has been going on since populations were established in cities. I mean, King David made a population census of Israel, which the Jews thought was a terrible thing to do. But anyway, he did. It becomes a superstition. You're not allowed to count Jews, you know. Yes.
So this diaspora did not come because of persecution as
No.
in modern times.
No.
This was
No.
free.
No, as a matter of fact, the diaspora arose voluntarily. It was not caused by persecution. It has nothing to do with modern times. We're dealing with a different situation because starting in the Middle Ages, we begin to have large migrations caused by persecution. But that's not what caused the diaspora. That's not what brought about the diaspora.